Hi and welcome back to Switch and Lever. If you've ever spent any time in front of a milling machine, regardless if it was a manual or a CNC machine, I am willing to bet that this has happened to you. Sure, as your skill increased, the less end mills you end up snapping, but doesn't it feel like an awful waste to just throw away what was once an expensive end mill? Let's make something new from them instead. First, let's shorten off the end mill using a cutoff disc on an angle grinder. End mills, especially these tungsten carbide ones, are harder than riding a drunk ostrich, so a hacksaw likely won't be able to cut it. Even abrasive cutoff discs take a beating, but unless you're grinding through a bunch of thick end mill shanks, it shouldn't pose too much of a problem. Hard as it may be, try to cut it off as straight and smooth as possible. Moving on. Further smooth off the cut edge using a bench grinder. Grind until you get it as smooth and square as you possibly can. Now, remember to wear a mask if you're grinding tungsten carbide. Likely, grinding 1 or 2 end mills aren't going to kill you, but the carbide contains some chemicals like cadmium and cobalt which you really do not want to breathe. Wear a mask. Now for the real fun part, playing with fire. But first, cut off a piece of steel rod. I'm using stainless, but you could really use whatever. Fix the steel rod in a vise and balance the cut-off end mill on top. Light your oxyacetylene torch. Relight your oxyacetylene torch. Heat up the steel and end mill tower evenly and add silver solder to affix them together. This specific solder is coated in flux, but you may also use a regular silver solder and apply flux before you start heating the parts up. Make sure you have a nice bead of solder running all around the joint. Take a break, be patient, and let it cool down. Once cool to the touch, head over to your lathe and turn down the steel to match the diameter of the end mill shank. Polish it up with a bit of Scotch-Brite to remove whatever solder might still be stuck to the outside of the carbide. I wouldn't use sandpaper as it will use dig into the steel while not affecting the carbide and creating a visible step where the two were joined together. Using a form tool, create a radius on the end and fine-tune it with a file and sandpaper until it's nice and smooth. Head over to the mill and make sure you clamp down the end mill shank straight. Using a ball-ended end mill with a large radius, mill down equally on each side to create a thinner profile with a nice filleted face. Flipping the shank to the side, you can square up the face with the mill by putting a mill backwards into the collet. It doesn't have to be painstakingly exact, just as long as it looks good. Using a series of progressively larger drill bits, drill a hole through, well, Carp. Well, that's what happens if you didn't take care to solder properly. Cut off a new piece of steel, clean off the surfaces properly and redo your solder and all the steps again until you're back at the mill. Again, using a series of progressively larger drill bits, drill a hole through the face you milled until you're satisfied with the size of the hole. Using a larger drill bit, give the hole a light chamfer on each side. Final step. Polish the steel up just to break all the sharp edges and get rid of some of the tool marks. Have you figured out what we made yet? Indeed, it's nothing but a simple key fob. Is there a point to it? Heck if I know. But it's a nice and heavy object, and with the discoloration from the heat, it's not too hard on the eyes either. There may even be something poetic about carrying your mistakes with you. Perhaps you'll be reminded not to make the same mistake again. Maybe it's like that tattoo you have of your ex-girlfriend's name. Or maybe you do make the same mistake again and you end up making a bunch of key fobs. My favorite one so far has to be the thin little boring bar, complete with insert. It also shows that you don't have to cut it off perpendicularly, but it does make for a bit of a hassle when soldering if the joint isn't straight. Hope you enjoyed the project. While you're considering how to turn your own mistakes into something useful, why don't you check out some other videos from Switch and Lever. and follow Switch and Lever on Facebook and Instagram if you haven't already. Until next time!